My name is Tim Galvin. I'm stationed in Dún Laoghaire. I'm a sergeant and have been a sergeant for 14 years, and I'm a member of the DMR East branch of AGSI. Well, the job is changing every day. We now have 10 oversight bodies looking at everything we do on a daily basis. If we take from the outside externally, you have all of the papers, the media criticising us on a regular basis. That's one part of it. But then you have the other aspect, is that there was no recruitment. So units, for example, my own unit went from 15 members on the unit down to 4. You're trying to provide the same service, and the stresses that that caused over a number of years. But on top of that, the job has completely changed. I'm a full-time administrator. I'm no longer a policeman. So what I joined the Guards for, I lost 14 years ago. The need to be out investigating crime, to be involved in the community, that's all gone. I sit behind a desk every day, 365, all year round. And the stress that that leads to, because you're not able to see what's happening outside. And the administration has changed completely. We now have PAF, as we call it, which is performance reviews every day. There's a meeting every morning. It goes through all of the incidents from the previous day, so you're depending on where it was a conversation with a guard, now it's on a computer system, which is not fit for purpose. So you're sitting at a screen all day, every day. If you take a few days off, you come into a maze of what we call emails. So there could be, for example, if you're off for 4 days, you could have 200 emails to go through. So your first day's work is spent looking at emails, never mind, and trying to respond to what you have to respond to. And there are other issues. We now have performance management coming in. An awful lot of the onus on that performance management is on the sergeant, because he's the first line supervisor for the people on the street. So an awful lot of the work that goes with that, depending on the size of your units, and you're on your own doing the performance with them, as well as all the other work. And then we're guards, so you cannot plan for tomorrow, because what you come into changes by the minute. And they're probably some of the stressors, and the responsibility for a sergeant now has completely changed. When I became a sergeant first, I supervised a unit. That was my job. Now the role has completely changed. Instead of having half a dozen, maybe a dozen roles, you could have some days you might have 40 that you might have to fulfill. And it changes. And then you get portfolios on top of that. And the inspectors is a completely different thing. That has come, some of our inspectors, if you take it to normal, you have an inspector on every unit in every division. Dún Laoghaire, we're down to 7 in the whole division, covering 10 units, plus your 2 detective inspectors. And the portfolios are immense, because they're doing an awful lot of work assisting the superintendent. And there's no time to do the normal day-to-day stuff, because they're tied up with inquiries and all of that. And then in Dublin, we have what we call a patrol officer. And the patrol officer has to go to every incident that occurs within the division. And if an inspector's off in another division, you have to cover that division. So the commute, travelling around the place and having responsibility for everything that's going on is causing issues for them. And then you have another issue that you don't have any, because there's been no promotions, you've no inspectors in command and control. So there's inspectors being nominated from each division to travel into command and control and do a month in there. But while they're doing the job in command and control, everything else that they have outside is left, and they have to come back to a stockpile of all of that work to try and catch up. So it's a vicious circle. Because they're not the bodies there's not the resources, the amount of work is just increased exponentially. And some people love coming into work, other people the stress is just too much. And that doesn't account for what's going on in their personal lives at home and the stresses of finance and all of that. So there are an awful lot of stresses coming on people. We've always seen issues with mental health in the Guards, but we've always looked after each other. Whereas you might go out after work and you might sit down and we'll have a chat, you might have a pint. Those days are gone, because now because people are commuting. They're commuting from all over the place, an hour and a half to work, because they can't afford to live in the city anymore. We do as much as possible. A lot of sergeants, we sit down, we talk to each other, but the stresses of it all, we've seen a huge increase of the suicide rate within Garda Síochána over the last 5 years. The last 2 years, it's been double the national average. So that has to tell the government and the Garda organisation that we have a serious issue within the Guards in relation to mental health. We have no well-being system in place other than people looking after each other. There's no facility in place. We have 24/7 counselling, thankfully, which was introduced, but we don't know what the uptake, because there's a stigma admitting that you have a mental health problem within An Garda Síochána, and there always has been. And these are all things that are playing in people's mind in the background, but unless you actually sit down and talk to people, we'll never find out. Myself personally, I would love to see the counselling become a mandatory issue, that if you're involved in a serious incident, that you must go to see somebody. For example, in my own division, we had the fire in Carrickmines where 10 people were killed, 5 adults and 5 children, and the trauma of being involved in that incident. Over the long-term mental health of all the people involved. People are still having issues over it because it's a serious incident to go to. They are the sort of things that, we have to deal with. You read in the papers every day, murders, stabbings, serious incidents. Most people can deal with it, but there are people that they need help, and they need help urgently. And they're the sort of things that I think we're falling down in. And we don't know what the mental stress of most of our members are unless you're talking to them yourself. You just don't know. And all of that information is probably at the bottom line, which is the guard and the first line manager, and nobody's aware of it further up because they're not dealing with people on a day-to-day basis. Again, every incident that you go to can be stressful, and you know by a sense, because you're working with people for long periods of time, you know how they're feeling. You can see when they're coming in whether they're stressed or not. I suppose because I'm a policeman for over 32 years at this stage, I know what to look for and what the signs are. Thankfully, myself personally, I'm able to deal with it, and I can give some help to, but not all the time. I've seen serious incidents where people are out of work for long periods of time because of the mental stress of doing the job, where they just can't handle it. Because there's so much pressure on youngsters especially. And in the city, for example, now it's an awful lot of our staff are probationers, people with 2 years or just over or less service. They're going to all of these incidents, but there's no supervision for them because I'm in the station. I'm not out with them. So I don't know what their reaction is. It might be 48 hours before I'll see that reaction because I'm not there. And for something like that, if there's a traumatic incident, you need to be there to see how people are reacting, because then you know you have to deal with it automatically. So they're the sort of things. You can give them peer support, you can give them advice to go and contact the counselling service or whatever, but you can't sit them down in the seat and make them do it. And they're the worries for the people, because you don't know what the reaction is going to be. And you don't know whether they're going to turn in for work the next day and what's going on at home because of the stresses. There has been immense stress on people certainly the last 10 years before this recruitment started, because the few that were left were carrying the can. And of course in the Guards we'll do it as best we can. And it has got us into trouble over the years because we do things for the right reason, but what we do is wrong. And that's what gets us into trouble. As far as I'm concerned, and that's both as a sergeant and as an AGSI rep, Garda management have no idea about the stresses that are going on, because if they did, we would have the service up and running and we'd be doing it properly. We'd have well-being, and we'd have systems in place where people can go and seek help without having the stigma that's attached to it. We do have, for example, traumatic incidents, we would have a debrief in some areas and then in others, but the advices from the experts would be a debrief is a good idea, or others would say it's a bad idea, so it's up in the air. So the Garda management's idea is, well, if somebody says it's not safe to have a debrief, then we don't have a debrief. But the people that were at the incident still have to go and deal with it within their own heads without getting the assistance and the help that they require. And if I go back to the Carrickmines incident, for example, the ambulance crews, the emergency services, the ambulance crews, the fire brigades, they had psychologists and psychiatrists at the location. We had nobody. And that's where our organisation has fallen down. And there has been an awful lot of very sad incidents, especially over the last while. I think we get thick-skinned and we just deal with it. But, for example, the North Central lads who are going to, so many over the last 2 years, it cannot be anything but stressful for them. And I don't think the systems are in place to look after those people. The welfare issues within the Guards, I suppose because the Guards hasn't moved forward. We still think we're in 1922. That's my attitude anyway. Our buildings, our demographics, the way we organise our workforce, it's all built around what was designed when the Free State came into being in 1922. We haven't changed it. But society and the world has moved on and we haven't. Or even down to, we'll say, our technology. Our pulse system was introduced in 1999. Here we are 20 years later, 30 years later, it hasn't been changed. Our command and control system was an remote American system that we got into in the late 80s. Hasn't changed. It's just been upgraded to the original system. All of these things they're there for the world to see for years. We've tried out for it. Technology. Now, we have promises of technology. The government have given us 270 million for technology in the next 5 years, but the cost of the technology to require is over 440 million. So they're picking and choosing what they're spending the money on. There are so many ways that the job could be made easier for people. Simple little things, like if I'm in a patrol car, I should have a computer in the car that I can sit down. If I want to check a car, I can do it. Things like location finders or access to information on the spot that I require. If I come to something and I need, we don't have that access. And like it's on our smartphones. Every day we can sit down in station and do it, but we can't do it when we're out on patrol. So patrol is where we require it. They're the sort of shortcomings that I find. For me personally, I would hope after this conference and the 40th year and the fact that it's going to be about welfare and the stresses that are involved, that maybe people in the public might sit up. We argued for many years about pay, and pay has now gone off the table until 2 years' time. But in the background and there's been this undercurrent about the pressure and the stresses that have been put on people to try and, we've all tried to do the job as best we can. With all the cutbacks and everything else that had happened for years, the stress levels were increasing on a regular basis. People really, I suppose, just thought, look, I have to get on with the job, I have to do it. There's nothing I can do about it. We'll make the most of what we have and we'll try and provide the service we can. And they've done that. People have worked extremely, you can't describe how hard people have worked and the responsibility that people have taken on in those few years. With recruitment, things have eased a small bit and the pressure on the few that were left has changed. But the organisation stopped recruiting into all of the specialist units in that period as well. So now those gaps have been filled. So they've stripped the people with the experience on the street again, in the city, for example. So we're being left with young lads trying to do the job again. I would hope that at the end of it, they might realise suddenly you cannot leave people on their own without some assistance in the background to do their job. I work the 24/7, so I work on nights and everything like that. On nights, the sergeant is responsible for what happens in the district. It's his decision, he makes the decisions. There has to be a system in place where if they require advice or assistance or whatever, there has to be something in place that they can, some backup. There isn't at the moment, and that's the fall down. There isn't enough supervision, and I'll keep highlighting it, and I have done it for many years. There is not enough supervision. Bailieborough at the moment in the Disclosures Tribunal is on full blast about people going out and doing whatever they wanted, nobody checking what they were doing. I'm afraid it's happening every day of the week in the city and in the country at the moment because there is not enough supervision. And there's probationers out and about doing whatever they want without being supervised. And that is causing stress to the people back in the station because they don't know what's going on outside. So it's a vicious circle, and that is something that would happen. And maybe at conference you might get the 170 delegates airing how they feel and the stress that they're under. And maybe somebody might sit up and say, oh wow, they are under pressure. Maybe somebody might realise that we're not just people that talk. We are family people, we're fathers, we're sons, we're nephews, nieces, what a grandfather for some of us. We are people of the society, and we do a job that's completely different than anybody else. We don't run away from incidents, we go straight at them. That is the difference between us and everybody else in society. That if an incident happens, a guard will run to it, not run away. So maybe at the end of this, people sit up and say, those people have to be dealt with as a completely different entity to everybody else and treated with the dignity that I think we should be given. At the moment, there's very little dignity in the guards.